Well, there have been people always who said that God doesn't exist. Now we have people who tell us that religion is actually dangerous and it ought to be eliminated. You listen to somebody like Richard Dawkins, who's the best known atheist in the world, and he was asked whether if he could eradicate, actually was together with Sam Harris, another very well-known atheist, if they could eradicate religion or rape, which one would they eradicate? And guess which one they chose? Religion. And we have people even in this country today who think that way, especially young people. You go online, you go on the internet, and you scour through different ideas, and you come up with this issue, on the opposite side of this issue, that we ought to eradicate religion, to do away with religion because it's dangerous. Now I want to begin by telling you why that's a very naive way to think. And I'm sorry to put it that way. It's just naive. There's no better way to phrase that. It's a very naive way to think. And the reason for that, and let me give you a couple of reasons. Number one, pragmatically, it is not possible, from a pragmatic standpoint, just how we do things in this world. Let's assume that these people have a point that they are making that we need to do away with religion. Let's assume that's true. What mistake are they making, and why do I think that's a very naive thing to think or to do? Number one, from a pragmatic standpoint, it is not possible to ignore religion. Religion has always been with us and always will be with us. Even in the US or in Europe, whatever surveys are taken about those people who believe in God, we always find that a majority of the people in this world always say they believe in God. Just a very small percentage of people who say they don't believe in God. So from a pragmatic standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to disbelieve in God. It is true, to try to do away with religion. It is true that in places like the US and the West, religion has gone down. Many people don't care about going to church or even talking about God. But if you look at what's going on in other parts of the world, the story is very, very different. Religion is increasing and growing by leaps and bounds, Christianity especially, here in Africa, in Asia, in South America, in China, in our world today. So to say you ignore religion is actually a very naive thing to do, because it's increasing, not decreasing in the world. And there's an essay that our team leader, Rabbi Zacharias, likes to quote by a guy named W.F. Borum. W.F. Borum said this, that the gospel is more like a bird than a candle. If a bird is singing a song on one bough of a tree and you frighten it, it doesn't stop singing its song. It just goes to another bough and continues singing its song. But when you blow the light of a candle out, that flame is gone forever. The gospel is like a candle. Some people reject it in one place, it just crops up somewhere else where people want it, and that's what's going on in the world today. And even in the West, where it's being rejected today, it will come back, it will find its way back to those places again. So from a pragmatic standpoint, it really makes no sense to try and ignore. Gifted in every area of life, and yet they are followers of Jesus Christ, or they are people who are very religious. And so being educated has very little to do with not being religious. And the reason many people who are educated today do away with religion is because in the educational system, we have built in this idea that we need to do away with God to properly understand religion. That's why people just follow along without ever looking at the arguments themselves. And you look at specific people, for example, James Watson, who was the head of the Human Genome Project. He was an avowed atheist, very strong atheist. But yet his successor, Francis Collins, is a very committed evangelical Christian, believer who now heads the National Institutes of Health in the US. So you find people on both spectrum, and so that leads us to see that this is not just an intellectual issue. There is much more going on than just what we do with our mind. It is not possible to understand our world today without religion. Trying to understand, for example, South America without Catholicism, or what's going on in the Middle East without religion, you are not going to get anywhere trying to do that. So from just a pragmatic standpoint, it doesn't really make any sense to say that we need to do away with religion. But Now from here, there are many routes we could take, and I actually toyed with the idea of presenting arguments for God's existence, but they tend to be very abstract, and we can talk about that during the Q&A. What I want to do is something different. I want to approach this issue from an existential standpoint, from the struggles that you and I face as we lead our lives in this world, and see how the question of God, the existence of God, answers these issues, these struggles that we face. And I'm going to be arguing that in spite of the popularity of books that are trying to popularize this idea of the death of God, global religion and all that, in spite of their popularity, God is still the foundation of all that matters to you and me, and He has made it possible for us to know Him through His Son, Jesus Christ. That's going to be my argument for the rest of our time. I'm going to proceed as follows. We will look at two main areas in our lives in which we must presuppose the existence of God in order to make sense of our own existence. Areas in which we must presuppose God's existence in order for us to make sense of our own existence in this world. I could have chosen many more areas to look at, but we don't have enough time to do that. So I'll just look at these two, and mention one very briefly, and then we'll be done. And the first area that I want to look at is the arena of the meaning and the purpose of life. The meaning and the purpose of life. And I'm arguing this. It is not possible to make sense of the meaning and the purpose of our lives without God. That is not going to be possible at all. Now, this issue of the meaning and purpose of life is one issue that never used to bother me at all. When I would hear people speaking about meaning and purpose and all that, it just flew over me. It didn't make any sense to me at all. And that was the reason for that was I did not really struggle with that issue. But I have come to see that this is one of the most important issues you can think about. You need to have an answer to this issue, especially if you care about ministering to people. I have talked to enough people personally to know this is a very, very important issue about the meaning and the purpose of life. Because the moment somebody gets to the point where they think their life has no meaning, has no purpose, what ends up doing is they break down, and they may actually end up taking their own lives. I saw a statistic very recently that really troubled me, that in the US alone loses 400 medical doctors to suicide every year. 400 medical doctors to suicide every year. And many of the reasons are these. We hold them to a very high esteem, which is true, and they try to maintain that standard, and yet they find out that they're just human, like anyone else. And even though they have everything they need in terms of money and prestige and recognition, it doesn't give them what they are looking for, the meaning and the purpose of life. Now, when we ask whether or not life has meaning or purpose, it's very important that we are very clear on what we are talking about. We are not talking about whether there are things in life that we enjoy doing, that we find pleasurable. That is always true. There are things that you find pleasurable, you find a lot of pleasure in doing, but that's not what meaning in life is all about. That's not what it's about. And it's not very difficult to show that meaning in life goes beyond just finding pleasure and all that. That's not difficult to show. I remember watching a man when I was in seminary out in California, going to Biola University. I would go to a practice to study. There was a library nearby with good books and good places to sit and study. And I would look out the window, and I would see this man at the park, and he would come there with a tennis ball. He would place the tennis ball on his index finger. It would roll down over about a few meters. He would walk over and pick it up, come back to the same spot, roll it again. And he kept doing this. He could do this for 2-3 hours. And he seemed to have a wonderful time doing it. I talked to him, I asked him what he was doing, and he said he enjoyed that activity. But most people who are normal, and if you don't mind, I'll assume we are all normal. Most people who are normal would say, that's a meaningless activity. And yet, it gave this man a lot of pleasure. It is possible to find pleasure in things that are not meaningful at all. it is also possible to do things that are very meaningful without deriving pleasure in those things. And that's what happens when you're taking care of a relative who is disabled, who has an illness. You would wish the person was not in that condition, but yet you do it because it is meaningful. So pleasure is not at the root of what it means to find meaning and purpose in life. I remember giving making this point in a place called Fargo in North Dakota. We have some people from there here in the audience right now. I was speaking there, and when I said it's possible to do things that are meaningful without finding pleasure in them, somebody shouted in the audience and said to me, "I can give you a really good example." I said, "What's that?" And the person said, "Giving birth." Very meaningful, but not pleasurable. I'm told. So when we ask whether or not life has meaning, we are not asking whether there are things we enjoy doing. That people confuse that all the time. When we ask whether or not life has meaning, what we are after is whether or not what we do in our existence in this world in the end counts for anything. Would it make any difference if you never existed, or if we never existed? Does our life amount to anything, or is everything a big fat zero in the end, everything that we achieve? And my argument is this: if there is no God, it doesn't matter what you are doing and how important you think it is. In the end, it amounts to nothing. It doesn't mean anything. That is what it means to look for meaning and for purpose in our existence in this world. There was a philosopher called Albert Camus who said this, that the most important question in life is why not commit suicide? Why go on living? That's the most important question in philosophy. He said everything else we study is peripheral to that issue of why keep on existing in this world. And when you think about it, and when you have achieved what you're looking for and all that, and this question hits you, you will one day have to struggle with it if you've never thought about it. Socrates said this, that the unexamined life is not worth living. But let me ask you this. How many of you have ever set aside a Saturday morning to examine your life? We don't do that. And if he was right, and I believe he was, many of us live very meaningless life because we pursue things that are temporal, that are just for this world, while we have been called for a much higher purpose, to know God, to participate in what He's doing in this world, and to be able to impart that meaning and purpose in the lives of other people, those we come across. Now, this question of meaning comes to us very powerfully when things don't go as we had planned. When you fail an exam, a very important exam, or when you're fired from a job, or when you're diagnosed with an illness, or maybe a terminal illness, something happens that causes you to ask the question, what is my life all about? That happens over and over again. I have personally talked to people who told me that the only thing, I remember clearly this one woman telling me, the only thing that keeps her alive in this world is because of the fear of the unknown. It may be possible there is life after death. That if she knew for sure there is no life after death, she would take her life. And so that's how many people live their lives. The question comes to us when things don't go as we had planned. But interestingly, this question of meaning and purpose of life also comes to us when things go exactly as we have planned, and we achieve what we were looking for, and we find out that it hasn't really satisfied us. That satisfaction, like a mirage, still lies far ahead. We haven't actually. Man, I know all these things are supposed to seem important to us. The car, the condo, our version of success. But if that's the case, why is the general feeling out there reflecting more impotence and isolation and desperation and loneliness? If you ask me, I say toss all this. We have to find something else. Because all I know is that at this point in time, we are heading for a dead end, a numbing of the soul, a complete atrophy of the spiritual being, and I don't want that. Rolling Stone. So if we are heading toward this kind of existential dead end in society, what do you think should happen? Brad Pitt, hey man, I don't know. I don't have those answers yet. The emphasis now is on success and personal gain. I'm sitting in it, and I'm telling you that's not it. I'm the guy who's got everything, I know. But I'm telling you, once you've got everything, then you're just left with yourself. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It doesn't help you sleep any better, and you don't wake up any better because of it. That is one of the most admired icons of our time, admitting that even though he has everything the world has to offer, it hasn't made him who he thought he would be. This is not new.